Today I want to share with you how to make a keto powdered coffee creamer that's a shelf-stable pantry staple. Hi sweet friends, I'm Mary and welcome to Mary's Nest, where I teach traditional cooking skills for making nutrient-dense foods like bone broth, ferment, sourdough, and more. So if you enjoy learning about those things, consider subscribing to my channel and don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. Well, my last video was so popular where I showed you how to make a powdered coffee creamer that many of you had asked me, could I show you how to make a keto powdered coffee creamer that was also shelf stable? So that's what we're going to do today. And it's very simple to make. All you're going to need is some heavy cream powder, some sweetener that's keto approved, and then any type of spice or flavoring that you want. Now first we'll talk about the heavy cream powder, and then we'll go over all the various options you have for how to sweeten this that'll be within the keto acceptable sweeteners. And then, just like with my original powdered coffee creamer, we'll also talk about different ways to flavor this. But don't worry, you won't need to write any of this down, because if you open the description under this video, there'll be a link. It'll say recipe, and next to it'll be a link. If you click on that, it'll take you over to my website where you can read the recipe and the instructions online, or you can print it out. Now, in order to make this keto friendly, we're going to stay away from the powdered milks that we talked about in the original coffee creamer video. And what we're going to need for this coffee creamer is a heavy cream powder. Now, sometimes, depending on where you live and what type of grocery store you have in your area, you may find powdered cream or powdered heavy cream in the baking aisle near where they sell the powdered milk. But if not, there are a lot of online sources for this. I'll be sure to put some links in the description below. There are different brands and sort of different levels. Sometimes some will just say a powdered cream, sometimes they'll say a powdered heavy cream, but they're all pretty much the same. I've found this particular brand works very well, it dissolves well, and so I've not had any trouble with it. And I'll specifically link to this one. This is made by Hoosier Hill Farm, and any of you who are familiar with Hoosier Hill Farm, if you buy a lot of dried powders and whatnot, they have a huge selection of different, they even have like powdered cheese, they have all kinds of powdered things. And they're done in a very somewhat healthy manner for dehydrating these type of ingredients. And this is gluten-free, obviously. It's heavy cream that's been dried. And it's also hormone-free. And for those of you who live in the US, like me, this is US made. Now, before we start talking about the different types of keto-friendly sweeteners that we can use in this powdered coffee creamer, I just want to mention that if you already know what type of keto sweetener you want to use to make this powdered coffee creamer, be sure to check the description below where I'll have timestamps. I'll also put them in the pinned comment. And you can just jump right ahead where I start making the creamer. And very important in those directions, I tell you what I recommend that you do with whatever keto-friendly sweetener you use before you add it to your powdered creamer. Now let's talk about keto-friendly sweeteners. Now I have my cheat sheet over here. I've made all my notes about these different sweeteners. And the one I have to tell you that I like the most is this, and excuse me if I'm not pronouncing it right, hopefully I am, it's very new to me, Allulose. And this one is open, but this is what the package looks like when it's unopened. And this is the Wholesome brand. I was very happy to see this because I like the Wholesome brand. I use their Sucanat and I've always been very satisfied with it. And what surprised me was this was sold at my local grocery store. I didn't have to order this online or anything like that. So keep your eyes open. It's becoming quite popular, I think. Now we'll go over the different sweeteners, but we'll start with the allulose. And what I liked about this is, and I'll read to you what it says on the back. It says, Allulose is a delicious calorie-free sweetener that tastes like sugar with a mild, clean sweetness, no bitterness, and no aftertaste. that's kind of key, because as we talk about some of the other sweeteners, they do sometimes have an aftertaste that people have reported. Allulose is a rare sugar naturally found in figs, raisins, and kiwi. It is free from fillers and flavors, making it the perfect zero-calorie sweetener, which that's another nice thing, that it doesn't have fillers, which we'll talk about more in a minute. It says it is perfect for low-carb diets, and I did research that. I know keto and low-carb is a little different, but I did read that allulose is considered a keto-friendly sweetener because, as they're saying here, it's 0 calories. We just see right here, calorie 0. And it has very little effect on the glycemic index, or it has a low glycemic index, or 0, I think, actually. So those are all good things, and the carbohydrate count is very, very low. So it says it's perfect for low-carb diets, as allulose has no glycemic impact on blood sugar. Allulose is great for baking fluffier, softer recipes like cakes, muffins, and quick breads. It dissolves easily. That's another nice fact, for when you're making it as a, in a coffee creamer like this. And so they say we love to use it in coffee, tea, so on and so forth. Now, we're going to talk about the other sweeteners, but I want to mention the expiration date on each of these. Unopened, this is going to expire in February 2022. And this, and expire, I shouldn't really use that terminology. It's more best by, and that's what it says here, best by. And this is best by is June 2023. Now, this has, even when it's opened, still has an excellent shelf life. This, once you open it and it gets exposed to air, is good for at least 12 months, so a year, in your pantry opened. So all of that said, this make ahead, basically powdered coffee creamer, can last in your pantry and stay fresh for about a year. Now, what is the ratio for allulose as opposed to if you were just using sugar? Now, to make this recipe, if you were just using regular white sugar, you would do 3 cups of the heavy cream powder and 1 cup of sugar. But with allulose, you need 1.5 cups to equal the sweetness level of 1 cup of sugar. Now, a common question that I was getting with the original powdered coffee creamer was, do I even need to put any sugar in at all? Or sweetener in this case. No, you can simply just use this in your coffee. If you just want something that's shelf stable and you like to take cream in your coffee, you can just put in a little bit of this, and that'll be very keto friendly. But you can go ahead and mix this coffee creamer with a little bit of spice or various other flavoring, and then you have kind of a nice flavored creamer. So that is an option. But I know a lot of you enjoy making these creamers so that when you put them in your coffee, they make a little bit of more fancy or sweet coffee drink. So that's why we're talking about these alternative sweeteners. Alrighty, so say allulose is not an option. The other options you have, and I'll talk about all the ratios, to sugar, to 1 cup of sugar. But your options are erythritol and monk fruit, or an erythritol monk fruit mix. Often monk fruit is mixed with erythritol to give it some bulk. Then you have stevia, and you've got the plain green stevia, which is basically just the herb. Stevia is an herb. And it's just, you can take the herb, dry it, you can even make it yourself. It's easy to grow stevia. And it's just ground up into a fine green powder, and that's an option. Stevia is also a little more processed, where you might see it as a white powder. And then sometimes there are stevia blends, again, to give the stevia a little bulk, and they mix it with inulin, I-N-U-L-I-N, inulin. I believe that's some kind of fiber. And then finally, another keto approved sweetener, I had to think about that for a minute, is Xylitol. And now let's start back at the beginning. Now, if you just go with plain erythritol, erythritol is a little less sweet than sugar. So if you did want to use erythritol to sweeten this coffee creamer, and you don't, you're going to keep it keto friendly, you're going to want to use 1.25 cups of erythritol to give it the same sweetness that 1 cup of sugar would. And basically 3 cups of creamer and 1 cup of sugar are going to sweeten your coffee very similar to the taste that you would get if you were buying one of those fancy coffee drinks. So if you say, those are a little sweet for me, I like it a little less sweet, then you can do, 3/4 of that 1.25 cups, or you can do 1/2 of that 1.25 cups. So it's really going to depend on your palate. Now, how about if you like to use the monk fruit that's mixed with the erythritol? If you do that, then it's an exact 1-to-1 trade-off. So you'd be using 1 cup of the monk fruit erythritol mix in place of 1 cup of sugar. Now, what about if you can find just plain monk fruit? Plain monk fruit, when it's not mixed with erythritol, can be harder to find, and it's a little expensive. But if you decide, I just want to use monk fruit, I don't want to use erythritol, and we'll talk about why in a minute some people don't like to use erythritol. If you can find just plain monk fruit, I have not seen that at my grocery store, just plain straight up monk fruit that's not mixed with erythritol. So it's something you may have to look for online, but if you can find it and that's what you want to use, you'll want to use 1/3 cup. It's a lot sweeter than sugar. So in place of that 1 cup of sugar, you're going to want 1/3 cup of erythritol. Not erythritol, 1/3 cup of monk fruit. But now, why do some people not like to use erythritol? And the reason is erythritol is what's known as a sugar alcohol. It can be made usually from corn, sometimes I think from wheat, but a lot of the erythritol that we have, that we'll find, at the grocery store and whatnot, I believe is made from corn. So there's 2 issues there. Some people just find corn products in general don't agree with them. It may cause achy joints or different other problems. Also, erythritol, being a sugar alcohol, can cause people to have digestive disorders. So a lot of people are turning away from erythritol because of the digestive disorders that it causes. So that's something to keep in mind if you've never used erythritol before, to try a little first and see if it agrees with you before you go ahead and use erythritol in making mixes like this, or in baking, or whatever the case may be, or using a monk fruit erythritol mix. Now, monk fruit is also starting to be mixed with allulose. And what this does, as you may recall in the beginning, I said that you're going to need 1.5 cups of the allulose to replace 1 cup of sugar. But what manufacturers are doing is they're adding monk fruit to allulose, and since monk fruit is very sweet, it now makes the monk fruit allulose mixture a 1-to-1 trade-off if you're replacing it with instead of white sugar. So that's something to look for. I have not seen that yet at my grocery store, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's going to start showing up on the shelves pretty soon. I'm very impressed with the selection of alternative sweeteners that my grocery store does carry. I think so many people are doing keto or paleo diets or low carb, and they're always looking for alternative sweeteners to replace white sugar, or even whole sweeteners, as I've talked about in the past, like a sucanat, which is a sugarcane natural. It's just dried sugarcane juice, or maple sugar, or coconut sugar, or date sugar. These are all whole sugars, and they're very rich in vitamins and minerals. However, they do contain carbohydrates, and to a much more significant amount than some of these alternative low-cal, low-carb sweeteners that we're talking about today. So grocery stores are very smart because they want to give their consumers what they want, and so many people are looking for these alternative sweeteners. So hopefully at your grocery store you'll see a big variety, a good selection to choose from based on some of the things we're talking about here today. Now, one more thing before we move on that I want to mention about the erythritol is that in addition to the fact that, yes, it is a sugar alcohol and it can sometimes cause a little digestive disorder, it also, I've made some notes here, it can cause people to have like a minty aftertaste. Now, that's not the end of the world if you don't mind that. If it agrees with you, it's not causing digestive upset, and you're happy to use it, and you don't mind a little bit of a minty aftertaste, you may not even get the aftertaste. But what's nice is, if you're flavoring your powdered creamer, if you're trying to do maybe a mint or peppermint, especially as we go into the December month with Christmas coming and whatnot, and you want to do a peppermint powdered coffee creamer, and you want it to be keto, and you want to add maybe some dried mint that you've pulverized into a powder, then it would work well, because the person may, or you yourself, or if you're giving this can make a great gift for anybody who's doing the keto diet. If the person did in the past get a minty taste or a cooling effect from the erythritol, it won't be as noticeable. And if you like mint already, it's a perfect combination. Okay, now I want to move on to talking about stevia. This is stevia. It's, as I said, again, I was surprised. I found this at my grocery store. This is just the herb. There's nothing else in here that has been ground up and put into a jar and sold. It's a sort of a rich green color, and has a very kind of herby fragrance to it. And this is very, very sweet. I think like 1,000 times sweeter than sugar. And this you can definitely use to sweeten your creamer. And the thing about stevia, especially, and I recommend if you're gonna go with stevia, go with the green powder, because you're going to use such a small amount, it's not going to affect the coloring at all. You can buy this where it's been bleached white, but that's the problem. It's been bleached white. And that is going to affect the nutritional value, because you're getting a stevia that's more processed. So if you can, try to go with the green if you decide you want to use stevia. But the thing is, this is so sweet. To 3 cups of heavy cream, you're only going to add 1/4 teaspoon per cup. So you're only going to need 3/4 teaspoon to sweeten your heavy creamer, to give it the flavor of what 1 cup of sugar or 1 cup of some of these other sweeteners we're talking about would give your powdered creamer. And as I mentioned before, stevia will be mixed with inulin to just give it a little bit of bulk. And if that's the case, then you're going to need 2 tablespoons of the stevia inulin blend to 1 cup of creamer. So you're going to need a total of 6 tablespoons of your stevia blend for your 3 cups of heavy cream powder. But like erythritol, stevia can also have somewhat of a minty cooling effect, but almost sometimes a licorice. Some people will get like a licorice flavor from stevia. Now, you're not using a lot, and that's kind of the key with stevia. If you don't have to use a lot, and for 3 cups, if you're using the plain stevia, you're only going to be using 3/4 teaspoon. So again, if you've not experienced stevia, take a little bit in a cup of coffee, in a cup of tea, just straight up like that, I think, in a cup of tea, rather than you could put it into black coffee too. But so that you can really get a taste for it. You could even just mix it with some hot water and see if you're picking up that licorice flavor or a mint flavor or a cooling effect. I gather that there's a terminology now called super taster. And it seems as though people who are super tasters are much more affected by these things than a lot of us. So I think it's important before you start making big batches of things that you try these different sweeteners and you see what type of taste you get, the initial taste as well as the aftertaste. Now, one more sweetener I want to talk about, which is also in the sugar alcohol category along with erythritol, and that's xylitol. Xylitol is a little sweeter than erythritol, so it basically can be used 1-for-1 if you're replacing white sugar. Now, some people can almost find, again, maybe this is in the super taster category, but can find xylitol quite sweet, although technically scientists tell us it is pretty much on the level of a 1-to-1 sweetness with white sugar. But some people find that when they're using xylitol, they will often cut it back to 3/4 of a cup or a 1/2 a cup when they're making any kind of mixture like this, or they're baking with it. And so again, this is something that if you decide you want to use xylitol, it's something that it's good to experiment with and taste it and see how you find the level of sweetness. Also, given that it is in the sugar alcohol family, there can be some flavors that you're going to pick up from it and some aftertaste. So again, you got to experiment with these things and find what agrees with you, because remember, sugar alcohols can sometimes cause digestive upset. So experiment, taste. A lot of these you can buy in smaller packages. These are the little individual packets, and just give it a try and see what agrees with you and what taste you like. And one thing I want to add about xylitol is the reason a lot of people like to use xylitol. Again, yes, there is that little bit of taste and aftertaste similar to erythritol, kind of minty or cooling, but xylitol can be helpful at, as scientists tell us, preventing tooth decay. So often when you see these sort of natural versions of sugar-free gums sold, they will often be sweetened with xylitol because it gives the gum a nice flavor, a nice sweet flavor, but also is possibly linked to preventing tooth decay. So that's another thing to keep in mind if you decide you want to go with xylitol. And again, I just want to mention these are all considered keto friendly. They all have that low or zero glycemic index impact on blood sugar, and pretty much everything we talked about is very low, like 5 grams or less in carbohydrates. Alrighty, so now that we've gone over a lot of the different keto-friendly sweeteners, we can get ready to make our keto-friendly powdered coffee creamer. Now I'm going to use a fine mesh strainer over my bowl just to get out any little lumps and bumps, so to speak, that may be in my powdered heavy creamer. And what I'm going to do is just measure out 3 cups. And now I'm just going to sift this through my strainer just to make sure that I break up any little pieces like this that are still solid. We'll get that all out and into our bowl. Next, I want to show you how there is some granulation to this allulose. It's not in a powdered form like, say, a powdered sugar. It actually looks like a very fine regular sugar. Now, even though this is a very fine granulated sugar substitute, it is granulated. Now, they say this dissolves well, and it does. But what I have found is if you mix your sugar with whatever flavoring, which we'll talk about in a minute, that you're going to add, it just mixes better in with your creamer or your powdered cream here to make a better powdered coffee creamer, a better end product. Yes, you could just add this right in. Yes, you could just add in your spice and it will work. But what I have found, and this will dissolve fine, what I have found is that sometimes the spices will not dissolve as well, and they'll tend maybe to float a little on the top. So what I find is that whenever I make these sort of make-ahead pantry shelf-stable mixes. I like to put everything in a very powdered form to help guarantee good mixing, good dissolving, and no problems. And what I'm going to do with the allulose is I'm going to just get it out of its granular stage and into a powdered sugar form stage using a little mini grinder. This is just like a coffee bean grinder. You can do this in a regular blender. You can do it in a high-speed blender. You can do it in a food processor. If you have one of those blenders that folks have that they make like smoothies in and stuff, that'll work. Anything will work. But what we're going to do is, as we blend our allulose, we're also going to go ahead and blend in our flavoring. Now, since it's full, now we're going to need 1.5 cups of this, because remember, in order to get that equivalent of 1 cup of sugar, we need 1.5 cups of the allulose. And I'm just going to go ahead and add that into my little grinder here. Now, as I was saying, since this is the fall that we're in, I'm going to use a pumpkin pie spice. You can buy pumpkin pie spice, or it's very easy to make homemade. I have a video where I show you how to make a lot of herb blends and spices and all sorts of things like that. I'll be sure to link to it in the iCards and in the description below. These types of things are so easy to make at home. You really don't need to buy them already mixed for you. So as I said, I'm going to use a pumpkin pie spice. You can use an apple pie spice. You can use dried mint, that's been pulverized into a powder. Or actually, it's going to get pulverized in here if you've got some dried mint on hand. You can also make a vanilla coffee creamer there's a couple of different ways you can do this. You can take your allulose, whether you're using the monk fruit erythritol mix, or it doesn't work as well with like just the stevia on its own, because there's not a lot there, but you can do this with the xylitol. What you can do is take your allulose and put it in a jar and just put in a split vanilla bean and let it sit in there for a while. Really I'll put the vanilla bean in with my sugars and just leave it like that indefinitely. But within a few weeks, you're going to notice that whether it's a keto-friendly, low-carb sweetener or a regular sweetener, whether it's white sugar or sucanat or whatever the case may be, it's going to take on the flavor and aroma from the vanilla bean. So now you basically have a vanilla sweetener, and you can use that. But now if you don't want to wait, you can take a little snip off of you can use as much as 1/2 vanilla bean, but they're so expensive. I would recommend just starting with maybe 1/4 of it, just a little snip, and you can grind that, go ahead and grind that in with your sweetener as we go through this process. And that can make a wonderful vanilla flavor. If you want to give this a chocolate flavor, you can add a little unsweetened cocoa powder. If you want to do a mocha flavor that will even intensify further the taste of your coffee, you can do a little cocoa powder and a little espresso powder. Generally, I find when you're using some type of spice, in this case, we've got pumpkin pie spice. As I said, you can also do an apple pie spice. You can also do straight cinnamon if you want. That makes a wonderful cinnamon powdered coffee creamer. You want to start with about 1 tablespoon and then see if that gives you the flavoring you like. I find a tablespoon works great. So I'm going to go ahead and add my tablespoon of powdered spice we're going to start with 1/2 cup, because that's about what I can fit in my little grinder. And I'm going to go ahead and pulverize the allulose along with that pumpkin pie spice. And that's going to allow it to mix really well when we try this out in our coffee. Alrighty, well, let's give this a little pulverizing. And really, it takes no more than about 30 seconds. Alrighty, well, we've got that beautifully pulverized. It's in a lovely powdered form now. And we're going to go ahead and add this right into our powdered cream. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and mix this very well. And then I'm going to grind the rest of my allulose in my little grinder here, because there are little bits of the pumpkin pie spice that didn't get pulverized. It's still in here. And also I find this is a really good way to get every little last bit, even that which is, whoops, even that which is like on the rim here and all, incorporated into our sweetener. It almost is a way to kind of quickly clean the grinder. Well, I ground up the rest of that allulose, and now I'm just mixing it in here really well to make sure that everything is completely distributed along with our heavy cream powder. And then we'll talk about what are the best ways to decant this and to store it. Now, your options for storing this when you go to put it into your pantry are to have it in some type of container that is going to protect it from air and from moisture. These latch type jars that have this rubber gasket here are very helpful. They work great. Ball, the people who make the canning jars, also now make a lid that actually on the top it says leak proof, but when you go to their website it says that not only is it leak proof, it's also airtight. So that can be a very good option. Now, yes, you've still got maybe your lid and your ring or band that came with your canning jar. You can certainly use that, or you can just use the plain white storage lids. Yes, they're not airtight, but they work fairly well, I think, at keeping air out. So you've got some options. Now, if you live in a very humid climate, you could even think about putting in one of those little silica gel packs. If you've seen me talk about those, they're real great, for preventing moisture from building up in things like this, in powdered mixes that can be susceptible to having their shelf life shortened if they get exposed to too much moisture. And I'll put a link in the description and in the iCards and in the description where I talk about silica gel packs versus oxygen absorbers and a whole host of other ways to store things for your pantry. And if that's something that you're interested in, learning more about stocking your pantry. And when I use that term, I mean the four corners pantry, your everyday working pantry that you access usually every day, your fridge, your freezer, and then also your extended pantry, what a lot of people call the prepper pantry. I have a 36-page pantry list, and it's what I call the Essential Traditional Foods Four Corners Pantry List. And it's completely free. I'll be sure to put a link in the description below. You can download that. And that'll help walk you through, especially if you're at the beginning of making the transition from a processed foods kitchen to a traditional foods kitchen, and you want to know how to go about stocking your Four Corners pantry. That can be very helpful. Now I'm going to go ahead and store my Keto powdered coffee creamer in this jar with the latch. We've got 4.5 cups basically, when you take into consideration that we did add the 1.5 cups of the allulose as opposed to just 1 cup. And most of these jars basically hold a quart, which is 4 cups, but there's a lot of settling that'll happen, and you can kind of shake the jar a little. I'll show you what I'm talking about, and you can definitely fit in the total 4.5 cups into like a liter or a quart-sized jar. And as you start to get closer to the top, you can just give it a little shake like that or a little tap. That'll help settle everything down so that you can fit in all of your powdered creamer into jars these sizes. Well, we've got this in our jar, and now we'll make a cup of coffee, and we'll see how well this dissolves and what it tastes like. Now, when I make this with powdered milk, I usually use about 1 tablespoon in my coffee cup, but since this is made with a heavy cream powder, I'm only going to go with 1 teaspoon. Now, in terms of the overall carbohydrate count, the reason we use the heavy cream powder was because heavy cream has less than 1 carbohydrate for 1 tablespoon of heavy cream powder. And the allulose has about 5 grams of carbohydrate for 1 teaspoon of the allulose allulose powder. So overall, I think about a teaspoon of this is going to have less than a total of 5 grams of carbohydrates. So definitely, I think very workable in the keto diet. So I'm not technically measuring an actual with a measuring spoon of a teaspoon. I'm just going to kind of eyeball it with my teaspoon. And then I'm going to go ahead and add in my coffee, and we'll give this a mix, and we'll see how well all of this blends. Well, that blended beautifully. There's no spice floating on top, nothing like that. So I highly recommend that tip to pulverize it a little bit with whatever sweetener you use. And if you're not going to use a sweetener, take a little bit of your powdered creamer or your powdered cream powder and pulverize it with the whatever spice you're using first. And I think it really makes a difference. Well, let's give this a taste. It's hot. Oh, that's delicious. You know, that allulose, I would think that that's sweetened with sugar. You don't really get the taste. You don't really get an aftertaste like you do with stevia or the erythritol or the xylitol. I highly recommend it. It's very nice. Well, if you'd like more keto recipes, including a keto bone broth, which is outstanding, be sure to click on this video over here, and I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country Kitchen. Love and God bless.